LGBTQ families are part of our society, are part of our community. They're our coworkers, our colleagues, our friends, our neighbors. And there cannot be a mentality where we're trying to exclude one another from where we live, from who is part of our community because of who they are.
When Rachel and Tanya Smith were searching for a home in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, they were looking for the same things that most other families look for in their ideal home.
We were looking for a place that had enough room and that we could afford. And ideally, good schools, a lot of room for the kids to play, because where we were had like the teeny tiniest yard, and they needed more room to run. So that would have been the dream package, all those things all at once. But we were willing to take, 2 out of 3 even.
1 out of 3.
Right.
Tanya and Rachel are a same-sex couple who first met and fell in love in college in Colorado. In 2014, Rachel began her transition to living as her true self. And in 2015, the couple began searching for their dream home.
I'd been basically combing through every day, 50 tabs open, and then going through and emailing whichever one seemed like they could potentially work even a little bit. And that's when I came across that house.
It was perfect.
They always expected to run into some challenges, but they never realized how severe they might be. After an untraditional vetting process with a Denver landlord, Tanya and Rachel were denied housing for no other reason than their loving relationship and Rachel's gender identity. The landlord's reasoning was written plainly to them in an email.
I have the email right here. I can read it.
Please tell me.
Hi, Tanya. Your unique relationship would become the town focus. In small towns, everyone talks and gossips. All of us would be the most popular subject of town. I need a low profile, and everyone would be into my business with your uniqueness, and it would jeopardize what I have had for 30 years. I am sorry. God bless you for the perfect situation.
Rachel and Tanya didn't get the house, which may be surprising because we have this law that's supposed to protect against discrimination. It's called the Fair Housing Act. Passed in 1968, it protects against many types of discrimination, including race, color, religion, disability, familial status, national origin, and sex. But its protection for being gay or trans is a bit of a gray area, one that Lambda legal attorney Omar Gonzalez Pagan knows very well.
The Fair Housing Act prohibits explicitly sex discrimination, but it doesn't define what sex discrimination is. It doesn't tell you that sexual orientation discrimination or gender identity discrimination are forms of sex discrimination. They are.
Omar believed that the intent of the law was to protect LGBTQ people, so he took on Tanya and Rachel's case, hoping to make a difference.
The most astonishing facts of this case is that the discrimination was in writing. We filed a motion asking for what's called summary judgment, saying there's no need for a trial. Your Honor, you have all of the evidence in front of you. And the court read our motion and issued the first opinion in the country that said that discriminating against people because of how they express their gender is a form of discrimination that is prohibited by the Fair Housing Act.
Specifically, the court ruled that stereotyping someone based on their gender violates the Fair Housing Act, and this landmark opinion was a huge victory for Rachel, Tanya, and LGBTQ people everywhere. But it isn't enough.
Does the decision in this case solve the problem of housing discrimination for every member of the LGBT community everywhere in the country?
It doesn't solve the problem. It is the foundation upon which we demonstrate that it can be solved. We set a precedent that discrimination based on stereotypes associated with gender identity was a form of discrimination prohibited by the Fair Housing Act.
However, while the court did say that discrimination based on gender stereotyping is illegal, it did not explicitly state that discrimination based on sexual orientation is illegal. Discrimination based on gender stereotypes versus discrimination based on sexual orientation is a very nuanced distinction, but it's an important one. This subtle difference still allows for the potential denial of LGBTQ people's civil rights when it comes to finding a home, because it allows for different courts to interpret the decision of the Avanti case in different ways.
Of course, there are different circuits and court of appeals, and the application of that precedent will vary, and we need to bring more cases so that we can set those precedents in those courts as well.
Discrimination against LGBTQ people is still especially problematic when it comes to finding a home. And unfortunately, a court's opinion is not the same as law. According to a 2017 study, 32% of LGBTQ people say that they or an LGBTQ friend or family member has been told or felt as though they would not be welcome in a neighborhood, building, or housing development because of their identity. And 1 in 5 LGBTQ Americans have felt personally discriminated against when it comes to buying or renting a home. The good news? Local and state governments all over the country are attempting to bring this to an end. Federal law can be seen as a foundation for which states can build and implement their own laws and policies. So while federally, there is still no explicit protection for the LGBTQ community when it comes to housing, many states actually do have those explicit protections, including Colorado.
21 states prohibit discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, others, 19, on the basis of gender identity.
It's not enough to fight this on a case-by-case basis. Even more impactful than that is, legislation. Trying to get the laws in place that are there so this doesn't have to happen.
Rachel is right, which is why people like Robin Merrill of the Human Rights Campaign are working on pieces of legislation like the Equality Act, which, if eventually passed into law, would protect the rights of LGBTQ people all over the country.
The Equality Act amends existing civil rights laws in housing, employment, jury service, public accommodations, federal funding, education, and credit. So it goes into these existing statutes and adds sexual orientation and gender identity, period. It just makes sure that LGBTQ people are covered.
By explicitly listing sexual orientation and gender identity as protected categories, we're sending a governmental message that those forms of discrimination are not tolerated in our society. And it sends a message to all of the people in our communities that we just don't believe that discriminating against LGBTQ people is an American value.
Like every other civil rights issue of our time, or any time before us, this one shares the same core value, that everyone should be treated equally and fairly.
What should someone do if they think they've been discriminated against?
I think you have a very simple list of things that you can keep in mind. Keep and document every single conversation you have. Just keep those records. Contact the authorities and contact the resources that are made available to you, whether it is a nonprofit organization like Lambda Legal or other organizations that are there to serve the community.
In 2017, the Human Rights Campaign calculated that there were at least 129 anti-LGBTQ state laws introduced around the country, 12 of which were actually passed. Federal pieces of legislation like the Equality Act, once turned into law, would supersede these discriminatory laws at the state and local level.
If you need better laws, then vote. We all know the importance of voting, and being an active member of a democracy requires your participation in order to ensure that those that are most vulnerable in our society are protected.
I want, for our family, I want our kids to be able to go out in the world and have the courage to be the people that they want to be, whatever that looks like, whoever that is. I want them to feel safe and free to give the gifts that is themselves to the world. And I want to be in a position to help other people because I feel that we have, as members of a society, a duty of care to help each other and lift each other up. We're only as strong as our weakest link.